Arsenal. Ozil. Marca Mesut Ozil. El envío al área, al remate. Y ahí está el primer tanto del partido. No lo celebra, por supuesto, Aaron Ramsey. 0-1 para el Arsenal.
This is Arsecast Extra.
Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, goodly morning to you. How's it all going?
It's good, yeah. Everything's fine, thank you. Goodly morning to you. It's very early in the morning where you are now.
It is, yeah, 6:30. I'm feeling a bit tired now. It's been a really busy weekend because I was in Charlotte until Sunday, and yesterday we drove from Charlotte, North Carolina to Washington, D.C., and with traffic, accidents, some ridiculous weather, thunderstorms and rain like you've never seen. It took like 6.5, maybe 7 hours to get here. So it's all a bit tiring, but great fun nonetheless.
Rain like you've never seen, and that's an Irishman saying that, so it's got to be considerable amounts of rain.
Yeah, Jesus, it was ridiculous.
I was away all weekend at a festival, Latitude Festival, in a tent, and it also rained a considerable amount. I'm not going to say it rained as much as you. I don't think I can compete, but when you're in a tent, less rain is ideal, but there was still quite a lot of rain.
Yeah, that's true. I saw some of your pictures on Instagram. You looked like you were having a fantastic time rocking the both the Arsenal home and away kit, and if you don't mind me saying, some glitter.
Some glitter, yeah. I must say, I stuck it to Stan Kroenke the only way I know how, by buying both home and away shirts. And no, they are glorious kits, I have to say, and I really, really, really like them. Someone came up to me, actually, who was a listener from the show. I really liked this. I've forgotten their name, but they were like, "Oh, are you Gunnerblog?" I was like, "Yeah." And it was about sort of 1 o'clock in the morning. We're like in the woods at some sort of little mini rave. And he was like, "I just didn't think I'd see you at a festival. It just doesn't really seem like your scene." I mean, I love that. Put that on top of the fact that everyone who meets me says, "Oh, you're much bigger than I expected." I'm like, what is the personality I'm conveying on this podcast of this small man who stays in his own home,
doesn't go to raves in the woods?
Not go to a rave in the woods, yeah. I'm subverting expectations all the time.
Well, look, I have to tell you, I had an amazing time in LA. I had a brilliant time in Charlotte as well. The fans down there were absolutely fantastic, and they came from not just Charlotte or North Carolina, but all over. We did an event on Friday, a Q&A, which was just absolutely rammed, and it was packed full of people and packed full of fans who wanted to chat and talk, and it's brilliant. And to meet Arsenal fans from all over, like Canada, Pittsburgh, Denver, Houston. There was a guy from Savannah, Georgia, who sounded like he was from Savannah. It was amazing. He had an incredible accent. But you know what struck me, James? As Arsenal have come to the US, and as I've had this amazing opportunity and privilege to meet so many Arsenal fans and so many listeners to this podcast, now we've been doing this for a really long time. And I like to think that, we're pretty good at what we do, and our analysis of Arsenal is not bad. I'm not going to say we're perfect, but not bad.
Sure.
More people wanted to talk to me about magpies than anything else. It was just like, oh my God, magpie facts have resonated with our listeners, perhaps more than anything we've ever done. Perhaps that says something about the state of Arsenal right now, but it was really, really funny.
This will always be the summer of the magpies, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not really a memorable summer for other reasons, I suppose, at this point, but that's so funny. I mean, were people, volunteering new magpie facts, or just asking you questions about magpies?
Yeah, it was just like, watch out for magpies. How are the magpies? Right. Why did you stop the magpie facts? All of that stuff. That's
going to be the new protest. We care about magpies, do you?
Oh my goodness. It was funny, but honestly it was amazing. I really enjoyed Charlotte as a city. It was smaller than LA. As you can hear, my voice is a bit on the croaky side because of all the talking I've been doing over the last couple of days.
So it's talking, not drinking.
It's definitely talking, James. I've been talking more than I've ever talked before in my entire life, which is, I'm not going to give out about it, but it's definitely left my voice. I need if I was on tour, if I was a rock star, I'd throw a strop and get my tour manager to get me like honey drinks and stuff like that. But I don't have anybody to do that, so I'll have to go out and get it myself.
I'm not there.
You're not there, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's a shame. No, in fairness, a lot of people were asking for you as well and wondering, why it was you weren't out. And I said he just didn't want to. No, I didn't. I told them you were preparing for your Edinburgh show, so they all understood.
Next time, you never know. Next time,
for sure.
And so you've been attending games as well amidst all this talking.
Yes, I have. I was at the game. It was a really weird experience at the game against Fiorentina because, excuse me, I was in the press box, and the press box in the Carolina Panthers Stadium which is good for members of the press, inside. So you're in this nice air-conditioned room. You have a beautiful view of the pitch, but you're behind glass, so you can't hear any of the atmosphere of the game. You can't hear the fans. You can't hear just the general ambience, which makes it really strange to watch a game of football in that way. The only thing you can hear is the pop music that they pipe in. The minute there's any kind of a break in play, the sort of pop music starts. So it's Katy Perry and Justin Timberlake and all kinds of stuff. Before the game, there was a guy called Destroy. Destroy was the MC, and he was like, he was like, come on, you guys, make some noise. Come on, I want to see your hands in the air. Come on. And this stadium, this 80,000 seater stadium was, it wasn't full. There was about 35,000 people there, which is a great crowd. But when I say it was 99.9999% Arsenal fans, I may be doing it, understating it slightly. So he's doing his warm up. And he's going, come on, let's get ready. Time to make some noise, you guys. All right, you Fiorentina fans, come on, where are you? Where are you? I want to see you. And it's like, you look around, it's like, no, there's no Fiorentina fans here. There's none of them. There might have been one or two. I think they might have sought out one or two. And then they would do strange stuff like when there was a corner kick, the stadium announcer would announce it. It was really odd.
Really?
So, he'd go like, corner kick Arsenal, taken by number 24, Reiss Nelson. And, they'd announce yellow cards, and it was yellow card caution for Arsenal, Joe Willock, or whoever it was that got booked, I can't remember.
Wow.
But the minute there was any kind of break in play, they would pipe this, insane pop music into the press box. So not only could you not hear what was going on outside, you were being bombarded with this music, and it was just a really strange experience. I don't know if you get a different sense of the game, because it's like just watching your TV with the sound down while someone's got the radio on beside you. On BBC Radio 1 or playing the top 40. It was quite odd.
Yeah, that must have really influenced the atmosphere, I guess.
Yeah.
But the game itself, positive signs. That's the weird thing, isn't it? For all our concerns about pre-season, the actual performances on the pitch have sort of been all right thus far.
Yeah, we won against Bayern Munich, and there was plenty to like about that. We obviously beat Fiorentina 3-0, and there were some really, I think, standout performances. I enjoyed Eddie Nketiah, of course. He got his 2 goals. Bukayo Saka, I thought, was really good. It wasn't so much that he was effective, but I like the way he tries to play. He's strong. He wants to get involved. He'll use his strength and his body to protect the ball. I thought Lacazette, when he came on, was really excellent. He was very selfless, obviously, creating 2 goals for one for Nketiah, one for Joe Willock. What else? Joe Willock himself, when he came on, another impressive display. So there were things to take away from the game against Fiorentina. Obviously, we started with a back 3, which I think vexed a few people. And I asked Unai Emery about this in his press conference afterwards. I asked him if he had a preference himself for a back four or a back three, which was his preference. And I asked him as well, was any potential transfer business going to influence, his preferred formation?
Yes, sensible questions. What did Unai respond?
Good evening.
Yeah.
And then he talked about playing with Nacho Monreal, sometimes as a centre half, how he can do it in a back three, but he can't do it in a back four, which, is perfectly reasonable, but it wasn't what I asked. And I think towards the end of the question, he sort of said that he wanted to improve Kolasinac and Maitland-Niles as fullbacks because that's a formation that we're going to use, that formation being a back four. That's kind of what I thought he said, but it's quite difficult. So he wasn't really very clear on that, but I'm hoping that the back four becomes our default system. But of course there are issues there, as we know, with Koscielny, and I sort of watched Mustafi with, I don't know how to describe my feelings.
Well, tell me, because I've only seen the highlights, so I've not seen the lowlights, so I haven't seen Mustafi's moments.
Fiorentina had a striker called Vlahovic, I think, Dusan Vlahovic, who was really quite dangerous, probably should have scored a couple of goals. There was one great chance in particular which he just put wide, but, positionally, Mustafi is kind of all over the place. Now, to be fair, he did play against Bayern Munich, and then was one of the only senior players involved in the game against Fiorentina as well, because we have a shortage of centre halves at the moment. So, he could have been tired, but it was just the sort of performance where you look and you go, this guy, he's kind of coasting. That was my sense of Mustafi. He's just kind of coasting through the game. He looks comfortable in the sense that he knows we've got a shortage of centre halves and that he's likely to be playing. And I don't think it's an ideal situation for us, because I think we would all prefer less Mustafi.
I think that's fair. We would all prefer less Mustafi, but doesn't it feel a bit like the way things are defensively with Koscielny, headed towards the exit door, and Saliba a year away from the entry door? We're looking at more Mustafi, maybe. We
are at this moment in time, because we've got Rob Holding, who's still a little bit away from full fitness. We've got Callum Chambers, and then we've got the ability to play a back three and use someone like Nacho Monreal in there. So a defensive recruitment is urgent, I would suggest, particularly if things are going to go the way we expect them to go with Koscielny. So,
well, Raul Sanllehi has reportedly flown home from the States. I can't confirm that myself, but I saw a story saying that he's come back in order to help tie up transfer business. I mean, the whispers are that they expect movement this week at Arsenal.
Right.
That they expect to get some stuff over the line. I mean, the names won't surprise anybody. It's people like Kieran Tierney, Ceballos from Real Madrid. That's an intriguing signing potentially, isn't it?
It is. He's a good player. He is a good player, and I was sort of speaking to people out here, and there is an expectation that the two sets of officials, given that we're both in Washington DC, could meet this week and have a good chat about Dani Ceballos. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, where we suggested that because of our limited budget, using the loan market would be a fairly sensible way of bolstering the squad. So if we can get this guy on loan, put him in the midfield, we've obviously got Joe Willock coming through, Alex Iwobi is coming back, El Neni is coming back, Lucas Torreira will be coming back. It does add some depth in there. So yeah, I'm kind of intrigued about that one, but it sort of feels like, yes, we really need to get our skates on a bit.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think someone asked a while ago, when can I start panicking? And I feel like maybe it was today that I said. So, by my own measure, I should be really worried at this point. But, there is still a little bit of time. I just can't quite see how the pieces are going to fall into place. And I suppose the only advantage for that is for the young players who, while this uncertainty remains over transfers, are getting the opportunity to impress and, for the most part, doing so. I mean, you spoke about Eddie Nketiah. He can't really do much more than he's been doing in pre-season so far.
That's true. And Emery was asked quite specifically about him in the press conference after the game against Fiorentina and what the plan was for him. And he basically said, look, there's a place in the squad for Eddie Nketiah, particularly now that Danny Welbeck is gone. He's sort of earmarked his place in the squad for Nketiah. He wants him to stay. He wants him to fight for his place. There was a suggestion maybe that he wouldn't get enough football. Emery was saying, no, look, when we had Welbeck, when we had Aubameyang, when we had Lacazette last season, they all played. So there was room for all three strikers. And I think that's the situation with Nketiah is I think that he's going to stay, and Emery looks like he wants him to stay. And like you say, he really can't do much more on this tour to knock on the manager's door and say, look, I'm ready to play games for the first team.
Yeah, I really liked his first goal against Fiorentina, just the composure of the little drag back in the box and the finish into the far corner. And I like that when he does step up and when he does play with the first team, I know these are pre-season friendlies, but I think it was evident from that first brace against Norwich. He does have a lot of personality, and he's small in stature, but he's a big character, and I think that stands him in pretty good stead. He seems to fit in quite well with that first team group. Well,
I tell you what, as well, though, there's definitely been a physical maturing as well. He's developed physically. Really? Yeah, in the game against Bayern, there was a moment where he was up against a centre half who was probably 6'3", 6'4", maybe someone of the size of Krystian Bielik, that kind of build. I can't remember his name. Sula, maybe. Would have been his name. And there was a sort of coming together, where the two players just kind of bash off each other.
Yeah.
What you might have considered like a good old-fashioned shoulder charge type situation. And Nketiah came out on top in that situation. And there was another moment near the corner flag where, again, he used his body and he used his strength to barge a defender out of the way. On that occasion, he was penalised. But there's definitely been some kind of physical development there as well, which might make him more ready for first-team football in the Premier League and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, look, his height gets brought into the discussion a lot, but it's perfectly possible to be not the tallest player, but strong on the ball. And, look at someone like N'Golo Kante. he dominates midfield despite his height. So I think that's really positive that you're seeing that sort of thing for Eddie Nketiah, because he's always had technique, he's always had finishing ability. And one thing I must say that I did enjoy in that win over Fiorentina was I liked Alex Lacazette's little layoff to Nketiah for that third goal. I mean, he actually created goals for both Nketiah and Willock, and that looked to me like a player kind of sort of assuming some seniority, and he could have taken those opportunities on himself, but looked for the younger man, and I felt like that was a nice touch from him, really. Yeah,
it was good. It was very selfless. He could have had a go himself, but he made sure that the young players got their goals. And Joe Willock, when he came on, he really added some drive and dynamism to the midfield. We did change our formation a bit as well in the second half. We went to a back four against Fiorentina. Willock has some real personality about him. He really does. He was determined to drive at the Fiorentina defence, and this, I know we've talked about the need to replace Aaron Ramsey, and how do you find a player like Aaron Ramsey? How do you get another guy who is good at the midfield job, but also someone who can get into the box and score goals? And the more I look at Joe Willock, the more I think this could be the guy. This could be the guy, because he does have the ability to not only use the ball well in midfield. I thought he was really, really assured against Bayern Munich in LA, but he has this knack getting into the box and getting into the box at the right time. You know, we saw him score goals last season for the first team, albeit in cup games. But the goal he scored against Fiorentina, he's in the box, he's overlapping, and it's it's a left-footed shot as well. I think that's something we've got to mark down too, because he's a right-footed player, finished beautifully with his left foot. So he does have this ability to arrive late and to score goals. So, look, I'm not saying he can come in and play 35 Premier League games and do potentially what Aaron Ramsey did, but the raw ingredients appear to be there.
Yeah, and even if you think back to the Europa League final and his cameo there, he had that chance where, again, he went beyond the striker. And you have to say he sort of did everything right. Opened his body, bent it towards the far corner, missed out by half a yard. So I think he does appear to be a player who's got that movement and got that composure in those key areas that I think were really key facets of Ramsey's game. I mean, it's interesting, against Bayern, he was in a deeper role, wasn't he? Like playing more as a traditional central midfielder. And then against Fiorentina, was he more advanced than that?
Maybe, because what we did against Fiorentina in the second half was play something like a 4-1-3-2 formation with Lacazette and Nketiah up front. I can't remember who Willock came on for, because we made such a host of changes in the second half. I think we might have made 10 substitutions in the second half, so it was kind of hard to keep track. And it was a really, really hot day. It was 35 degrees out there, and the game was being played at a fairly slow pace. The two guys who started in central midfield, Robbie Burton and this guy's name, I've got like a mental block with this Olainka, that's it. Yeah. They were good. I mean, they weren't bad at all, but there was just something extra with Joe Willock. I don't know how to describe it more than that, but just something. He's a bit more advanced.
He is, and he's just been through a really good 12 months, I think, sort of physically and technically in his development. It's interesting, isn't it, that there are names on this tour that, we haven't really discussed before. Robbie Burton's a good example of someone who I think Unai Emery himself said he didn't really know a lot about him. Freddie Ljungberg spoke to him about his credentials, told him he's a useful player, can play number 6, number 8, and suddenly he's out there with the first team and developing. And often in youth development, it is sometimes these guys who come up on the inside that you're not necessarily anticipating that can really impress.
Yeah. So this week we're playing Real Madrid, or tomorrow we're playing Real Madrid in Landover in Maryland. So that's going to be interesting as well. Zinedine Zidane and Gareth Bale having their fun times together.
I mean, that's a curious situation. I mean, I suppose it's not unlike a situation we've kind of had at Arsenal with Mesut Ozil and Unai Emery in terms of trying to potentially move somebody on who isn't desperate to go.
Well, I tell you what, the fans out here really love Mesut Ozil, because the few times we could hear anything were when the crowd really got worked up, and when Ozil, Aubameyang, etc., went to work. Xhaka and a few of the other senior players went to warm up in the first half. There were really big cheers, and I was in the tunnel in the mix zone afterwards, and Ozil came in after doing a bit of a wind down, and the fans were going crazy for him. And it does appear as if things between himself and Unai Emery are much more even, perhaps.
Cordial.
Cordial. And look, this goes back, I think, to the formation that we use. If we're playing a back four, and if we're playing maybe a 4-1-3-2 or even a 4-2-1, whatever the fuck, I can't remember what numbers are, it's too early, but there's obviously an easier way to get Ozil into the team when you're playing with a back four than with a back three. So that's why I was really curious to sort of nail down Emery on what his preference was. I didn't get the answer quite as clearly as I would have liked, but it does feel as if Ozil and Emery are kind of on the same wavelength. And if we are to do anything successful next season, if we can get the best out of Mesut Ozil, or anywhere approaching the best out of Mesut Ozil, I think we've got a greater chance of achieving what we want to achieve.
And how's he looked out on the pitch? Has he looked sharp? I'm not referring to his hairstyle.
No. He stands out, obviously, because of the hairstyle. I thought he was really, really good against Bayern Munich. I thought he was really good. The three players that stood out for me against Bayern were Joe Willock, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who was unbelievable.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. Like, we were at the training the night before the Bayern game, and about 10 minutes in, Aubameyang was left in a heap on the floor. He was in quite a lot of pain. I'm not quite sure what happened. It could have been a tackle or a little bit of an ankle roll or something like that, but he got some treatment and he carried on with the session. And against Bayern, it was just amazing to watch him that early in pre-season as well, running the way he did, being as direct as he was. The pace and the power and the athleticism of him was incredible to watch, because he did it for 80 minutes. And Ozil as well against Bayern was fantastic. He made a lot of runs that we didn't necessarily spot, or we didn't have the ability to play the pass that the run deserved, if you like. And if we had, I think he would have been even more involved against Bayern. So I was really impressed by his showing against Bayern. It was hard to know really what to make of anyone's performance against Fiorentina. Ozil came on with about 10 or 12 minutes to go, and he was fine, but it was a roasting hot day. The game was basically won by the time he came on, and you can't really make any assessments. But he looks fit, he looks sharp, and hopefully he looks up for it. And maybe the idea that he's going to be more involved in a position in which he feels really comfortable could be a big motivator for him, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. And look, given the situation, given that I think a move isn't going to happen, and that's perfectly clear from the outside, what are you going to do? You can't just have an asset that you're paying that kind of money that you discard or relegate to the fringes of the squad. You have to try and make it work. And I do think in the right system, there is still a very talented player there. As for Aubameyang, we spend so much time worrying about his aging process. It doesn't appear to be affecting him physically too much at this stage. No,
it really doesn't. And, a lot of people have been asking, are we going to cash in this summer on Aubameyang? Are we going to sell him? Because, apparently there's been talk of interest from Manchester United. It would be the stupidest thing we could do this summer, as far as I'm concerned. Even if we do need to raise some money, that's not the way to do it. He looks really, really up for it, Aubameyang. And if he can sort of play the way he did against Bayern, against Premier League teams, he's going to cause them all kinds of problems. And it's interesting because he was playing from the right rather than as the main striker. Lacazette had a kind of quiet game against Bayern Munich, but if Aubameyang can do that from the right hand side, then it's very, very promising.
I don't know if it's just something I'm picking up on from a couple of things Emery said in press conference. He's mentioned, I think it was when asked about Nketiah, he's mentioned Aubameyang playing wide, I think a couple of times already in pre-season, and obviously he started there against Bayern. Do you get the impression at all that he might look to do that a bit more next season, just because if he wants to go back to a back four, it might be a way of including Lacazette and Aubameyang in the starting 11 as he did at the start of last season?
Yeah, it might well be. Look, it's hard sometimes to really get the true meaning of what Emery says in his press conferences, and that's not to be critical, but he tends to sort of go off on a slight tangent. Or whether it's, linguistically, he can't really address questions quite as directly as you might like. But when you look at the players that we have, when you look at the squad that we have, and the key performers and the players who you would consider really important for the team, Aubameyang and Lacazette are obviously two of them, and we saw that towards the end of last season. I wouldn't be surprised if we did see Aubameyang quite regularly from wide positions. And I thought it was interesting that he was working from the right-hand side against Bayern rather than the left-hand side, which is where he's normally deployed as if he's being used wide, So maybe there is some method to the madness there, or Emery is trying stuff out.
Yeah, maybe. I suppose it's interesting as well in the context that we don't have an obvious candidate to start at right wing necessarily. You know, it's sort of Henrik Mkhitaryan maybe, but he can be in and out as we know. And also we're talking about Wilfried Zaha potentially, who plays frequently off the left. So, you know, I'm not saying that deal's going to happen, but the fact they were looking at him suggests that maybe there is something in this Aubameyang on the right thing. I think we might see a fair bit of it next year. And I know people have their issues with Aubameyang on the flank, but if it means, you know, switching to a back four, and it means that you can get both Lacazette and Aubameyang on the field in a balanced formation, I don't think it's going to stop him scoring goals. It never really has.
No. I mean, he has scored goals from wide positions. I've woken up this morning and there appears to be quite a bit of Zaha chatter that I haven't been able to get to the bottom of. So can you tell me what's going on there?
As far as I'm aware, it's that there's talk of a new bid of £55 million plus possibly Reiss Nelson on loan for a season. That's the rumour that I've seen going around on Twitter. I don't know. Here you go. The Independent is the original source. Has most recently suggested a £55 million deal with $10 million of that dependent on clauses, as well as Reiss Nelson on loan. Palace, I believe, consider that not enough.
You know, that sounds not bad to me.
I think, yeah. What in terms for who? For who?
Well, in terms of what I would see Zaha's value as, I know Palace obviously, you know, value him higher than that, but realistically, you know, I would suggest that £55 million plus Reiss Nelson on loan is about right. That would be about my limit for Zaha. I know there was talk of Emile Smith-Rowe being included as well. People have spoken to over the weekend. We're talking about Smith-Rowe as somebody who might go on loan, but he's just coming back from injury. He just started training again, so I'm not sure how ready he will be. He is. I saw him in the tunnel after the Fiorentina game. The Arsenal, you know, contingent were hanging around there. He wasn't involved. He wasn't doing any training, but I believe he's just started back in training. Their first session in DC, so he probably won't be ready. Reiss Nelson, I was interested to watch him against Fiorentina, and he didn't really stand out. Right. So I know we've got a lot of high hopes for him, but maybe a season on loan somewhere could be the right thing. And if it helps get Zaha, maybe the club are willing to do that.
Well, if you were to bring someone in like Zaha, it would directly impact the amount of playing time Nelson would get. So it kind of makes sense. I mean, it would arguably be a good next step in his development to play for a Premier League team for a season. I mean, I think I'm on record as saying I think he'll be part of the first team next season, but you know, if Zaha comes in, there is a certain logic to that, and also that loan, you know, that would have a loan fee attached ordinarily, which would be worth, you know, a couple of £1 million. So I think I agree with you that's, you know, I can understand to a certain extent Palace's turning their nose up at 40 million, even if I don't think it's a ridiculous offer on Arsenal's behalf, but obviously it's a big gap in there between that and their valuation. But 55 plus a player on loan feels like a potential compromise, and I think I agree with you in that that's getting close to the ceiling of what I could see us paying for any player, really.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, we'll have to wait and see what this week brings, whether or not there's going to be any deals. Is there anything else we need to talk about in the first part of the show?
I'm just trying to think. I mean, because so much has happened. We've played 3 games since you and I last spoke. So I'm just trying to scroll back through my...
I mean, obviously, Edu is there now, and he's having a bit of an influence, and people are saying...
Oh, go on.
He did an interview, didn't he, with the official website, but people are saying he's like really impressive. Really impressive in terms of the way he talks about the job that he does, and it's not just, you know, ex-player platitudes kind of stuff. He's been quite impressive in the way that he's addressed certain issues.
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you about. Speaking of hearing from people, obviously, since you and I last spoke, we have heard something from KSE and Josh Kroenke, and I just wondered what your reaction to that was, to his letter to the fans, and what the reaction to that has been out in the States. Has it been sort of warmly received by the fans you've met, or is there a bit of cynicism there?
I think there's a bit of cynicism in the sense that, we got a response, and I think that's fantastic, for the thing to have gone out and for there to have been a response so quickly, I think can only be a positive thing. That if it opens up lines of communication, then fantastic. The sense I get from people out here, people I've been talking to, and my own feeling on it is I've kind of had enough of words, and I know that that's really the only thing he can do, is to respond in that style. He talked about transfers, didn't he? He said that we should be excited, which reminded me of the Ivan Gazidis "we can do some things which would excite you" quote from a few years ago. It's now about making the words into actions, putting things in place, like tangible, genuine things we can look at and say, yes, okay, you've responded with words, but now respond with actions. And I think that's kind of where most of the people I've spoken to are. We're happy for the response. We're glad that there has been an acknowledgement of fans' concerns and disenchantment with the way things have been going. But now it's down to them to make things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's telling that it's Josh who made the statement rather than Stan.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, when he said, what did he say? When I speak on behalf of my father, and I speak on behalf of KSE or whatever it is. And to me, that's very, very clear. I'm the guy. I'm the one that's going to be doing the talking. You're not going to hear from Stan. I don't think we're going to hear anything from Stan, not that we necessarily expected to. But if Josh has now put himself in the position of figurehead, then he is the one who's got to be held to account. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. And, Stan, with respect, he's 71 years old. Josh is the future of KSE and consequently the future of Arsenal in the short term at least. So I agree with you. I think it's good that the dialogue has opened up, and that will continue. There's a Q&A with some supporters, I think, not too far away.
I think it's on the 25th, is it?
25th, yeah, I believe so. So that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. And of course, Josh says all the right things, and they have always said the right things, in fairness, but I think it's about showing us, not telling us at this point.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, look, we're going to leave it there for part one. We're going to come back with your questions and more in part two right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part two of the show where we answer questions that you sent to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog. Also on the Arseblog Facebook page, but not this week because I'm traveling and it's too hard to keep track of, so apologies, Facebook. And also on the Arseblog Patreon Discord server. It's a chat server you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. And if you are, you can follow my exclusive US tour diary on there. If you're not already a member, you can sign up at patreon.com/Arseblog. It costs just $5 a month, and you get access to all the extra stuff immediately and what have you. And I'm going to take the first question, James, from the Discord. I know we touched on it slightly, but it comes from Greenfoot, and he says, to use a classic Wengerism, does signing Zaha or Everton kill Nelson?
I have to say, by the way, the name Everton keeps confusing me every time I see it on the timeline. I'm like, what? We're trying to buy the club from Usmanov? What's going on now? But
he'd never sell to us.
No, I know. Famously, does it kill Nelson? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think that, how old is Everton? Zaha is 26. Everton, I think, is slightly younger. He's 20. I can't quite figure out this Everton story, because if you listen to some reports in Brazil, we've got, doctors on standby to do a medical.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
I don't know how credible that is, to be honest with you. Especially because the Zaha story is still rumbling on. I don't really foresee a situation where Arsenal sign both those players, do you?
No, definitely not.
I agree. I don't think it should kill Nelson. I think if Nelson... there's plenty of time for Nelson to develop, and if that happens over the next couple of years rather than the next couple of months, I think that's okay. And I think his talent we've seen before. We know he's a substantially talented player. I think if he can master that and develop properly, that will out in the end. And the way that we're talking about playing 4-2-3-1, something like that, there's room for multiple players who play off the strikers on either flank or even as a number 10. I think Nelson's future ultimately might be in the centre. So, no, I don't particularly worry about it. Do you?
No, not really. We, regardless of who we've got coming through, I think everybody wants us to sign a player who can play wide and add something different to the team in terms of, dribbling ability, being able to run at defences and everything else. The thing to consider is Reiss Nelson is still quite young. He had quite a good season at Hoffenheim in terms of what he produced on the pitch. He scored 7 or 8 goals, whatever it was, and he had that amazing run at the start of his loan spell there. But he didn't play every week. He didn't play week in, week out. He didn't start games week in, week out for Hoffenheim. And we can probably read something into that in terms of how ready he is. There were a number of issues with the coach sort of telling him, look, you're going to have to work harder or be a bit more professional he wasn't like a fixture in the Hoffenheim team. So I think the idea of him coming back to Arsenal after a season and being immediately ready to start week in, week out in the Premier League is a bit fanciful. So when you consider that he signed a new deal before he went to Hoffenheim, he's in no danger of being somebody who could slip out of our clutches, if you like. So we've got that assurance of a long contract with him. And if he goes and plays a season on loan at another Premier League club and, improves and does better and matures physically and becomes a more rounded player by playing in the Premier League next season for somebody else, I don't see that does his chances of making it at Arsenal any harm whatsoever. It probably would increase those chances. Conversely, you could say he could stay with us and he could play Europa League games and everything else, but it depends, what the long-term view of Reiss Nelson is. So I don't see how a signing would really kill him. It would make his job maybe a little bit more difficult, but that's a good thing. I think that could be a good thing.
Well, let's build on this question, because 1.76 acres on Twitter says, considering we now have what looks like a great depth of potential up front and wide, and then he lists Eddie Nketiah, Bukayo Saka, Emil Smith-Rowe, Reiss Nelson and Martinelli, without even considering Zaha, how do we develop everyone? Who goes out on loan? Who stays? How does everyone get time? And I think it's a fair question. I don't think all those young players are going to get sufficient playing time this season.
I think it is a good question. I don't know how you develop all of them. I don't think you can keep them all this season. I think a couple of them could go out on loan. When you look at Martinelli, he had an amazing chance in the Fiorentina game. He was through on goal and it looked easier to score. He put it wide and he was absolutely disgusted with himself that he missed the chance. I think when you've signed a player like that, he's probably more likely to stay, particularly as he's getting to adapt to England and English football and everything else. It feels more sensible to keep him in-house so you can accommodate him and make that more comfortable for him, that settling in period, rather than just imagine like signing a kid from Brazil and then shipping him out on loan to wherever. That would make his life an awful lot more difficult. So I feel like probably Nelson and maybe even Smith-Rowe could go out on loan. Nketiah, we spoke about him earlier, and the desire of Emery to keep him to sort of fill that Danny Welbeck place in the squad. So I think it's inevitable that you develop some of these players elsewhere. And that's the only way to do it, and it depends on how they view the potential of these players and what the best next step for them is. Is it to play occasionally for Arsenal or regularly somewhere else? That's the balance.
Yeah, I think your point on Martinelli's a good one. He's just arrived in this continent. And, we saw in the past with the likes of Wellington Silva, Joel Campbell. I'm not sure how well it ever served those guys, the fact that they had to go out on loan straight away because of work permit problems and couldn't really build up a base at Arsenal. I think he will stick around. I think Eddie Nketiah will stick around. I just have a feeling that Emil Smith-Rowe will go out on loan. His loan spell for the second half of last season was ultimately a bit of a non-starter in terms of the injury that he was dealing with in his time there. And I feel like they sent him there for a reason. They sent him there because they want him to get that game time. And I feel like that might be the case again this summer. Bukayo Saka is an interesting one. I mean, I know he's younger than Nelson and younger than Smith-Rowe, I believe, but in some ways, he seems almost more first team ready, and it's difficult to explain why. But just whenever I see him, he has such explosiveness when he plays that there's something about it that just seems to click every time he steps into the first team. He never seems to look out of place, and I think maybe of this whole clutch of youngsters, he's sort of the one who is the most eye-catching game to game in terms of what he contributes to my mind, anyway.
Yeah, when you see a player on the pitch and you can immediately get a sense of their personality, like their football personality. We don't know what they're like, off the pitch, and it's not about that, but it's about the way they try and play the game. And Saka is such a positive player. He wants the ball, he wants to bring others into play, he wants to run at people, he wants to track back and take them on. He's willing to do his defensive work. It doesn't all come off for him, because he's still quite young and still raw, but the intent to play in a positive way is there, and that's, I think, the most impressive thing about Saka for me. If he can marry that with what he needs to do with the ball, then I think there's a real player there. I would be inclined to keep him and use him in Europa League games and what have you, and maybe think about giving him a loan in the second half of the season. That would be my preference with Saka. So yeah, look, these players are all there and they're kind of knocking on the door, some of them louder than others. And Emery is obviously going to have to make his mind up over the coming weeks before the transfer window closes as to who he wants to keep. So it'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Is it my question? I think it is.
It is your question.
Okay, let me see. This one comes from David Mortimer on Twitter, who is at David Mortimer 30, who says, is the whole 5 captains thing symptomatic of a club that has a chronic lack of direction right now? Call me old-fashioned, but I think we should just have one captain, someone who embodies the values of the club on and off the pitch. And I think it should be Hector Bellerin. That's what David said. Top Goon, who's at Kieran H, also says, who at this stage do you think the 5 captains are going to be next season? And Emery was asked about this at one of his press conferences. Are you going to keep this sort of 5 captains thing going? And he basically said yes. I mean, I could understand it in his first season because it seemed like an obvious way to get everybody on side and, build a kind of support group within the group. It's difficult to argue that it worked particularly well, especially when you look at the 5 captains themselves and the way things kind of played out for them. I mean, it doesn't look like a massively successful policy. Equally, in the absence of Laurent Koscielny, I'm not sure there is one outstanding candidate to be the captain. So yeah, maybe it's not the worst possible thing. I would also like Hector Bellerin, almost sort of for ideological reasons. I kind of believe that he embodies a lot of the values of the club in some ways, and he just seems like a good guy. But I can understand maybe why, especially with the burden on him of just coming back from a very significant injury,
it might not be sensible to just hand it to him. He's not available at the start of the season to begin with.
It is a tricky one, because I think when you look at the squad and when you look at the profile of the players, the most obvious candidate for me is Granit Xhaka.
Yes, that's true.
But I also feel like if you give Granit Xhaka the captain's armband, you're sort of handcuffing yourself to him in a way that maybe isn't the right decision from a footballing point of view. Does that make sense? Like, you can see, because he's captained his country, he's 26, 27 years of age. He is, whether people like it or not, he is that kind of leader in terms of his own personality. I was talking to a few of the journalists, James Benge in particular, out here from Football London, and we were talking about this, and he said that, like, Xhaka is one of the only players who will ever front up after a game and chat to the media and take some responsibility, even when things go wrong. And we can talk about Xhaka's own role in that. He has his terrible moments which frustrate us. But in terms of just, personality of the man, I think Xhaka is the obvious candidate. But my concern about that is I'd sort of like our midfield to go in a slightly different direction. Like, if Xhaka is your captain, is there not like a slight pressure or an onus on the manager to pick him week in, week out? And does that then affect the decision making when it comes to team building? Do you know what I mean about this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the only thing I would say is that obviously, Mesut Ozil and Petr Cech were among the 5 captains last season, and Emery didn't feel particularly wedded to them at any point. So I think if you make him captain on his own in isolation, then yes, I think you are slightly wedded to that. But if he's one of the 5, I don't think it presents as much of a problem.
Yeah, if we are going to do this 5 thing, which I don't really agree with either, and the other thing to point out here is that, I think if you do have an outstanding candidate to be captain, it makes it easier to have one captain. So if you have a Tony Adams, or if you have a Patrick Vieira, or even a Mikel Arteta type figure in the squad, then it's easy to have one captain, because that person has the leadership and has the respect and garners the respect from the rest of the squad. I'm not sure we really have that one guy who's head and shoulders above the rest. I agree with you about Hector Bellerin. I think he represents the club brilliantly. But I don't know that he's quite that senior figure to whom all the other players would look up to, in a way.
Yeah.
And maybe, his personality being what it is, and it's one that I like a great deal, is it necessarily one of leadership? It could well be as he gets older. But I don't think we have just yet that talismanic captain that everybody wants. And the reason is they're very rare. They're really hard to come by. If you could have a Tony Adams in your team, every team would have one, So we don't quite have that. So for next season, slightly fudging the issue, as much as I don't really dig this 5 captains thing, it might just be a way of creating a group which looks for responsibility from the other players. And I think it'll be Xhaka, I think it'll be Ozil, just because of seniority. The 2 strikers, Lacazette and Aubameyang, I think they'll be involved. Potentially Nacho Monreal, if he's still around. And I think Emery said something about having an English component to that captain group. And if that's the case, then I think Rob Holding could be one of those.
It kind of has to be, doesn't it? I mean, Beyond that, you're looking at youngsters, Callum Chambers. I think it probably has to be Rob Holding if he wants an English player in there. I think the point about Bellerin is fair. I mean, as much as we might want him to be captain, there are some big egos in this squad. You think of stars like Ozil, Aubameyang, and you need someone who can kind of command the respect, command authority in that group and in that company. And maybe Bellerin's not quite at that level yet. So I think, Ozil, Xhaka, Holding if he wants an English player. I think I would then probably go Lacazette and Monreal for me. It's no slight on Aubameyang. I just feel like, he's a different kind of character within the team to a leader maybe. But, he's very well liked. So he definitely will be under consideration. Yeah.
I mean, and again, just to sort of clarify, I wouldn't necessarily consider Ozil a captain type figure. I don't think it's his personality at all. But I think if he was part of the 5 captains group last season and some fences have been mended with Unai Emery and what have you, I think if you take it away, it creates an issue that maybe we don't need.
Exactly. And, why would you draw attention to that problem, and create an issue unnecessarily? If Ozil is going to stay, to a certain extent, bridges have to be built, and you don't want to burn them down by removing him as one of the captains. And also, at the end of the day, he's a guy who's 30, who's won the World Cup, who's very, very experienced. There are things about Ozil that you would want within that group, and that we're not necessarily rich with. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Your question?
My question, let's find it now. We've actually already had a question from this person, so apologies for doubling up on Greenfoot on the Discord. But Greenfoot asked, "Good morning, gents. What was your takeaway from the Sven Mislintat interview? My initial feeling was negative, but isn't a more pragmatic, modern approach where simultaneous approaches are employed what's required?" Did you see Sven's interview?
I saw that where, he basically said that we were moving away from a data-driven model when it comes to our transfer business, right? I mean,
well, let's be clear. So, when I did GCSE history, the first thing they teach you is you got to look at your source. So, is there a potential bias or spin on this? And you have to say, yes, of course there is.
Yes, there is. I mean, look, it's a bit like the Dick Law interviews that came out recently with Charles Watts. If you were to take everything Dick Law said at face value, it would be very hard to tally that with some of the stuff that went on at the football club in terms of transfers and everything else. Maybe Dick Law wasn't as bad as we all thought he was, and from I think that might well be the case. But maybe he wasn't quite as good as he said he was in those interviews. Like, everything seemed to have like a perfectly reasonable, rational explanation. But I think it was maybe sugaring some of those situations. And I guess to an extent that's what Sven Mislintat has done in his interview. Is it that we've moved completely and utterly away from data-driven transfers? Or using data to identify our targets? If that's the case, that would be really, really worrying. However, I think we know that stat DNA is very much embedded within the club. Arsenal bought stat DNA. They have an influence over what we do. There is unquestionably data being used at all levels of the football club when it comes to fitness and that kind of stuff. And you have to imagine that stat DNA will have an influence on some of the transfer targets that we have. The other side of that is that we can think of players who were identified to us by stat DNA, or certainly players who we think were identified by stat DNA, and they include Gabriel, they include El Neni, Granit Xhaka, Mustafi. So the data hasn't always worked in our favour, it would be fair to say. I can't believe, I find it very hard to believe that our recruitment is just going to be down to a couple of guys and who do you know and who have you got available? Yeah, we'll take him. It doesn't seem like a sensible way of doing transfer business at all in this modern era. It can't just be like, we're going to meet round the back of the petrol station the way transfers used to happen and, handshake and off you go. So,
no,
I'm a little bit dubious about it. That's all.
Yeah, I am too. And when you look at the business that we have done so far this summer, we've plucked an 18-year-old forward from the Brazilian regional league. We appear to have tied up a deal for a teenage centre-half in Liga. They don't feel like Raul ringing his old mates. Do you know what I mean? And saying, who can you give me? Now, listen, on the other side of the coin, we do appear to be doing some of that. You know, if this Dani Ceballos thing comes to pass, I'm sure that will be something that's slightly hinges on some of Raul's connections in Spain. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I mean, in the case of Denis Suarez, it didn't work out. But if we get a good player for a year who's fit and can contribute on loan, then I think we'll all be pretty grateful. And likewise, if something happens with, say, Malcolm from Barcelona.
Sure.
There are two different approaches here. And I mean, essentially, what it sounds like to me is that when Ivan Gazidis left, there was a bit of a power struggle, and it's one that Raul effectively won.
Well, I mean, he did say, didn't he, Mislintat, I was promised the job of technical director.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's where the relationship broke down, I think, much more than the approach to doing transfer business. It's just my read on that situation. So,
yeah,
we'll wait and see. Here's one from Lucas Isberg, who's at Lucas Isberg, who says, could the absence of outgoing transfers be explained by the fact our transfer window for sales lasts longer than for new signings?
Well, outside of England, that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Potentially. I always worry about that because I sort of feel like if, let's say you bring a load of players in and then you need to move some on after the incoming deadline has passed, do you leave yourself in a position where clubs are going to say, well, look, this is my final offer, you can take it or leave it? There's not going to be an English club coming in to double the money or anything like that. I wonder if it makes you slightly vulnerable and isn't the best way to strike a deal. But I suppose it does provide some hope in that, you know, if we get everything done in time, we can slightly balance the books and shift one or two, you know, even if it is on loan and it just rebalances the squad somewhat and reduces the salary bill. That could be a good thing. I suppose it just feels like a lot of the money is in England, so selling within England would be great. I mean, I can imagine an English club, say, paying much more for Mustafi than you might get out of the Bundesliga or Serie A, you know? Yeah,
look, I think we're in a situation where many of the players we want to sell or move on are kind of damaged goods anyway.
Yeah.
And we're in a situation where basically we might just have to take whatever we can get for them, assuming that, you know, we've got enough depth to cover them. Yeah, look, it does make it a little bit more difficult, and it does put you in a difficult position as a selling club. But yeah, I don't know. We're just going to have to. That's the market that we exist in, and we're going to have to, you know, work within the confines and restrictions of that market. It might also be a case that, let's say we sign a central defender, and you know it puts Mustafi a little bit further away from the first team. That also plays a part because, you know, people know we probably want to sell him. So that's just the reality of that situation. You can't play hardball in that scenario. So, you know,
we're not great sellers at the best of times.
We are not.
When there's a limited market in terms of who can buy, yeah, I do worry about what sort of fees we might be able to extract from players at that point. But I'm sure a couple will leave after that deadline. It seems absolutely inevitable. This question's from the Discord, and it's from Pav. It's a player we've touched on a couple of times in pre-season. Pav says, Bielik, WTF? The man does great on loan and internationally. We have a big gap exactly where he plays. What could be going on behind the scenes? Why are we pushing him out?
That's a good question, and one I don't have an answer to. And maybe if I get a chance over the next couple of days, I can ask Unai Emery about that. There was an interesting quote, wasn't there, from Saka, where he said something along the lines of, you know, Unai Emery doesn't really talk to us directly. It's Freddie Ljungberg who's providing that transition into the first team squad. So I wonder who is making the decision about Krystian Bielik. I think we have to accept that the football club and the staff at the football club have more information on him than we do in terms of how they're assessing him and their opinion of his abilities and his readiness to play first-team football for Arsenal. We can watch him play well for Charlton, and he did do very well for Charlton, but that was in League One. We watched him play very well in the European Under-21 Championships. Again, though, that's, against Under-21 players. So there are some caveats to that. I look at him and I see a player who is physically the right kind of player for the Premier League. At centre half, I don't see him in midfield. I think he is a very tidy footballer, but maybe not quite nippy enough in the Premier League to play as a central midfield player. So I would see him as a central defender. That then means for me and for a lot of people, like I'm sort of in anywhere or anyone but Mustafi territory right now in terms of what I want at centre-half for Arsenal next season. So Bielik is not Mustafi, therefore he's a prime candidate to play first-team football, right? But I also think that Arsenal will know, the staff and the coaches and the everyone else, the technical staff, will know a lot more about Bielik. So their decision-making probably isn't the same as ours. What's driving it isn't quite, well, he's just not Mustafi, therefore, he's better, let's give him a go. So the only thing I can think of is that based on their assessment and their information of Bielik as a player and the way they see his potential, is that he's either not ready yet or he's not quite good enough. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might just be a disconnect between what the player wants and what the club wants. Bielik's played a whole season out on loan, and I think a lot of footballers, it's not like Reiss Nelson where he was, a fringe player. He played every week for Charlton and was part of a successful team in League One, admittedly. They get that taste for first-team football, and they don't want to go back to playing every 6 weeks or only playing under 23 games. I think this might be driven in part by the player saying, look, I want to play. And Arsenal saying, well, you're a good prospect, but you're not going to play every game here. You might play the Europa League games or something like that. And maybe he feels I'm better than that. And maybe there's just a bit of a disparity between how the club view him and how he views himself. But I from what I've seen, my untrained eye thinks he has all the tools. And I'm a bit confused by us selling him. I hope if we do, we get a decent deal or we extract some sort of sell-on or buyback. We can arrange something which kind of covers us financially, because he's a player we spent a fair bit of money on when he was 16 years old. There was talk of a fee of, £1.5 million or something like that. So, you want to make some profit on that. And the other thing I would just say about him is that as much as he does look great to me in the clips I've seen and the bits I've seen of him, maybe there's something a little bit akin to the J. Emmanuel Thomas effect, where you've got a guy who's come through youth football who's always been about a foot taller than his opponent. He's so much more physically powerful that he sort of can't help but catch the eye, and he has a certain advantage at that level that maybe, amidst the athleticism of the Premier League might level out a bit and might not necessarily see him cut it at that height of the game. And also, we talked about Freddie and his input. I think a player Freddie really rates, and one the manager does too, is Zach Medley, who's 6'5" himself, I believe, and a pretty elegant ball-playing centre-half too. And maybe there's just an element of, we've got William Saliba possibly in the bag coming in 12 months' time. We've got Rob Holding, we've got Callum Chambers, and we want to ensure Medley's path isn't too blocked. So that could also be a factor in any decision.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point as well. Medley is a big guy. He's a big guy. I walked past him in Los Angeles, and he's like, whoa, okay. And again, he's still quite young, isn't he? He's only 17, 18, I think.
Yeah, I'll have a look now.
You have a look and tell me, because I can't type stuff
in. This month, a couple of weeks ago. 19.
Say again, you just broke up there?
Oh, sorry, he was 19 a couple of weeks ago.
19 a couple of weeks ago. So, he's still at an age where he's gonna fill out over the next couple of years as well. So he's gonna be a fucking hell of a unit when he does that. So maybe there is some belief that he could be part of the things. But again, going into going into the season, I do feel still like we badly need to address the central defensive side of our squad. Callum Chambers. I mean, I had a question here. Let me see if I can find it. Why can't I find anything here? 1 second. I'm going to get there. Yeah, so it's from Sam Manton 14. And he says, with Koscielny leaving, I think there's a widespread acceptance now, isn't there, that Koscielny's basically going to go. And Saliba going back on loan if we sign him, as well as Holding being out for the start of the season. Do you think Chambers will be called upon to be our starting centre-back? Like, at this point, would you prefer to see Sokratis and Chambers or Sokratis and Mustafi?
I'd prefer Sokratis and Chambers, probably. Even though, I mean, Chambers, people have said, rightfully so, that he was Fulham's Player of the Year last season, but that was playing in central midfield, and when he played at the back for them in the first few weeks of the season, admittedly they were not a good team, but he had a bit of a nightmare. But I think I would probably opt for him. I mean, I'm still sort of crossing all my fingers that Rob Holding's miraculous recovery continues, because he is ahead of schedule, isn't he? But it's very close, that first game now. Yeah,
you've got to be sensible though as well with Holding. You know, there's no point rushing him back. There's no point risking aggravating the injury by bringing him back a bit too soon because you haven't been decisive enough in the transfer market.
True.
I do wonder as well, maybe if part of why things have been quiet, we haven't really been linked with any central defenders apart from Saliba. I do wonder if what they think of Rob Holding is having an impact on that. So they don't, going back to the question about, does signing Zaha kill Reiss Nelson? If you make a signing, does it impinge on the pathway to first team football that Unai Emery perhaps wants for Rob Holding?
Yeah, maybe they're looking at Holding and Sokratis and saying, look, that's going to be our central defensive partnership for the majority of the season, and if we have to make do and mend for the first few weeks, so be it. I can understand that. We know Emery really likes Holding. I suppose the only test will be, I think Holding, Arsenal have always been in a back three, to my mind anyway. Certainly in the run in 2017 to the FA Cup final, and then for a good chunk of last season he was playing on the left of that back three. So it'll be interesting to see when he is fit how he slots into the four and how he deals with that.
Okay.
This question, I'm intrigued to ask this because I haven't really seen the press conferences myself. The Lemming on Twitter says, at what point does Emery protest at not having the backing of the club in the transfer market? And I just sort of secondary to that, did you sense any tetchiness from him on that issue, or the club still presenting a united front?
I was really curious to see what he would say about transfers. He hasn't been, to my mind anyway, he hasn't appeared to be worried too much about lack of transfer business. So when he's asked about transfers, he talks about the young players that we've got on the tour and how it's important to give them opportunities. But he has made it clear that we need to bring in players. He talked about 3 or 4 players last week at some point. He wanted to bring in expensive players. He wanted to bring in big players who can help us next season. But in terms of his general mood towards transfers and the general mood around the tour when it comes to things like that, I get the sense that they're quite relaxed. Whether that's good or bad, I can't say. Is it a case that they're confident of getting the deals that they want to get done? Even Josh Kroenke, didn't he? He said we should be excited about potential transfers. So maybe there's a sense that, yes, we do have our targets. We're confident of getting the targets. I think Emery a couple of times has said, look, we have our first choice, and then, you know, we're trying. I think they obviously have a list of players that they want. So in this position, this is the number 1 target, number 2 target, number 3 target, number 4 target, whatever it might be. I don't know how far down it goes in terms of alternatives. So if we can't get Zaha, maybe Suarez, Everton is the guy that we want to bring in, or Malcolm is the guy that we want to bring in. So my reading of that situation and what Emery has said is that they're really focusing on those first choice targets at this moment in time. And those deals might be a little bit more complicated than the other ones. And I guess there's a cutoff point, you know, where they say, okay, well, look, it's not happening with our number 1 target. It's time to go down the list. So my understanding is that they're focusing very much on their number 1 targets. And trying to get those deals across the line. So it seems that Zaha is the number 1 target for the wide player. It seems that Kieran Tierney is the number 1 target for left back. And as we know, both Palace and Celtic are not making it easy for us to sign those players. Nevertheless, at this moment in time, we're persisting. You know, from what you said, made a better offer for Zaha. So I think that's where we are. And that's why nothing has been happening, because the focus is on those number 1 targets. As we get closer to the deadline and as the first game of the season draws around, there'll have to be a slight shift in how we approach the deals that we want to get done. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I guess maybe that relaxation comes from the fact that they might feel they have the players' agreement, particularly in those 2 cases. They might feel that, you know, the player would be happy to come. In the case of Zaha, would really want to come. And they're just going to sort of push it as much as they can with the transfer fee and try and get the deal they can get. Yeah. And yeah, you would think, you know, a week before the end of the window, at some point you have to go, okay, well, that hasn't happened. We've got to pursue other targets. But in some ways, I kind of think it's right that if you've got that number 1 target in mind, that you try and make it happen. But as you say, that has to be a cut-off point somewhere. Yeah,
there really does. Okay, let's do one more, because I've got to go do an event this morning, which is why we're recording really early over here.
Cool.
Oh God, I don't know what it is. I can't find the question. Have you got another question there?
I've got a quick one, which is from Brian M. Boyle on Twitter. Brian says, is the supposed pressing style evident on the pre-season tour, or has that been forgotten about?
It certainly wasn't evident against Fiorentina, but I think mostly because it was so hot. Yeah. They had they had water breaks every 15 minutes because it was just so hot on that pitch. So I don't think anybody was going to press. Against Bayern, maybe, but there isn't, you know, I think when we talk about pressing, people have this idea that, like, there's this coordinated, almost balletic, you know, synchronized movement where the whole team squeezes and you know, it's like a living, breathing 11-man organism, which, you know, closes down the opposition. It doesn't really happen like that. You know, there was elements of it in the Bayern game. Certainly Aubameyang was you know, snapping at some of the defenders and what have you, but as a collective kind of thing, I don't really think we've seen too much of it, and I'm not sure that it's what we all thought it was going to be. Do you know what I mean? When we talked about this at the start of last season, we sort of had this idea of this relentless press. You know, when Barcelona lose, you know, when Barcelona lose the ball and immediately they swarm around the opposition, they get the ball back. I don't know that that's what we're doing or what we're going to do.
No, it's a classic case of somehow losing Unai Emery in translation, I suspect. Yeah. The only thing relevant to this I had heard is that people who watched the Colorado game, was it, on the first preseason friendly, told me that Martinelli was quite good at pressing. He was quite good at shuttle sprints and closing people down, which is encouraging, I guess, in terms of him as a player so far. But that's the only thing I'd heard sort of referring to the pressing.
We might see a bit more. I don't think it's going to be quite as hot. I'm just going to look at the weather for tomorrow when we're playing Real Madrid here. So at the moment it's getting up to like 34 degrees today. Yikes. Yeah. But tomorrow it looks like it's going to be slightly cooler, maybe around 26, 27, with a bit of rain actually. So maybe the conditions might allow for a bit more of a physical game. And because we're playing Real Madrid, I think the way they've decided on the teams or the team selections, we went fairly strong against Bayern Munich, a lot of kids against Fiorentina, and the big guns came on in the second half. Aubameyang didn't even play against Fiorentina because he was feeling a bit of a knock. They want him to be ready for the game against Real Madrid. And I think we'll play a strong, fairly senior team against Real Madrid. So maybe the conditions there will allow for a bit of that, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'd be surprised, to be honest. I feel like you're right. When we think of what pressing is, I think our idea of it is somewhat different to Unai Emery's. And I think that's partly what creates the confusion. Alrighty.
Okay, look, we're going to have to leave it there. But as ever, thank you very much indeed to everyone for listening. Again, a big thanks to everyone I met over the weekend in Charlotte. It was an absolute pleasure to hang out and meet so many Arsenal fans and to chat about the club and also to chat about the work we do here on the podcast and on the website as well. So thank you all for listening and reading and everything else. I'm glad they got to see a fantastic win for Arsenal at the Bank of America Stadium. It was 35,000 fans in that stadium. 34,995 of them were Arsenal fans, so it was great. And everybody I spoke to, a lot of people, it was their first time seeing the club and maybe their only time that they're going to see the club live, so it was great that we got a win. We will have a podcast of some description or other on Friday, so stick with us for that. Again, patreon.com/Arseblog for more thoughts and behind the scenes stuff from the US tour, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then,
bye bye.